Here
we are live.
We're
we
live.
Are live.
We
Is
live.
anybody still here? Is anybody still in our pop-up chat here? Any of you patient folks? Murr, you're here. Yes.
You're still there.
You are here. Please tell me somebody's here. Pop up in that chat.
Mur's there.
Murr
Yeah,
was here. Murr was here. I'm still. I can't see. You know, there's a delay. There's a delay, and it's been so long. Maybe they've closed the window. Oh my goodness. Yeah, Murr, you are awesome. Hopefully, yes, TC, you are the yes. Oh my goodness, yes, please. Murr, if you wouldn't mind, could you please go on to the to that same post that you were there? And by the way, thank you for what you said. Could you please go on there and say something about how this podcast has just gone so far downhill, and it's just all a result of the unprofessional behavior of the hosts and just the way that they can't seem to keep their schedules. Just please, dude, pile it on, because you know what? I just want it all. It's like a baked potato, man. Load that thing. Load it up, because I want it all.
I don't want that much.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are here. Come back from the technical difficulties. Come back from the screen that has all those colored bars. I forget what it's called. I'm sure that I'm showing how young I am by saying that. But you know, we're not alone.
Back when you went off the air.
Yes, yeah, the off-air screen. But we are not alone. We are joined by a guest. Max, welcome.
Thank you much. How are you guys doing tonight?
I am doing just swell, dude. I'm really excited to talk about this game. I'm really excited to have a new guest on here, and I'm just really happy that you agreed to be a part of this episode of the Longview podcast on Roll for the Galaxy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope we have a good time tonight. It's a good game. I'm excited to talk about it.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah, we're gonna have a good time. I think we will, especially if TC's involved. That's my co-host TC Reed. How you doing tonight, TC?
Howdy doody, doing great.
He's keeping Portland weird by making the equivalent of the Addams family out there with board games. The Addams family of board games, the Reed family. You guys are wonderful, and I had this hilarious discussion with TC's son Liam, who's 9 years old.
Yeah, 8 or 9. Somewhere around there.
8 or 9. He's 8 years old. Okay. It was a discussion I had with an 8-year-old over whether or not he should go next Halloween as It the Clown or as Chucky from Child's Play. That is the type of...
He already went as Jason Voorhees this year.
Wow.
You know what? You know what's going to happen? Your son's going to grow up and he's going to be like, you know what? My dad's into all this weird stuff. I'm going to go straight and narrow, because that's like the opposite. You know, I always wonder, like, if any of my discretions, you know, my venturing off of the path has been a result of the fact that my parents raised me to try to be a good person. Like, maybe if they'd raised me to be, you know, a small doll that kills people with a knife, that I'd be like, you know what? That's not what I want to do. I want to go do good things in the world.
Well, he has told me he wants to be a detective now. So,
dude, that's awesome. He should be like forensic scientist. Yeah, and you know what? That would mix together what you do, TC. TC's a lab work. You do like processing of like blood samples and that type of thing.
Oh yeah, I work in a hospital laboratory in the pathology department. So anything that comes out of your body comes to me, and I slice it and put it on the slide for the pathologist to read. Yes, well, I love my job. And I am morbid.
Being like a medical examiner would marry together this you know, love for the macabre together with, you know, his what comes natural to him through his patrilineal heritage. So and speaking of patrilineal heritage, I see here that Murr, earlier you were entertaining my dad, who I'm actually extremely impressed was able to write a comment in our comments section. How ridiculous is that? I can't believe that my dad is here joining us. So So anyway, I don't know if my dad is still there, or he might be there. It might be my mom who's sitting there like, David, come here. David, come here. They're talking about us. David, you got to write something in the comments. Come on, David, get done with that thing. You got to come. Stop eating, David. That's my parents. I love them both. My mom and my dad, wonderful people, just here to watch, believe it or not, the Addams Family musical with my wife as the director and all the kids here at the high school where I teach. They just did that this last weekend. It was awesome. We actually played an escape room game together. It was just so great, guys. I am rekindling this love for board games that I kind of stamped out with a few heavy games that just were not my parents' forte. And it's all moving forward. So anyway, thank you so much for appreciating this moment where I could just open up my soul to the world. Max, you're here too.
Yes, I am here.
We have this guy called Max on? Really?
Yeah. And Max is here. Max, your role in this podcast has not quite come to its fruition yet because we haven't yet mentioned really what we're going to be talking about. Well, I guess maybe I said it earlier, but we are here to discuss a classic, according to the top 100 on Board Game Geek, and in the mind of many people, a game that fixed one of the most popular game systems out there, Race for the Galaxy, and that is a dice version of Race for the Galaxy. It is called Roll for the Galaxy. And Max, you reached out to me and said, I'd love to talk about this. And I thought it was just an awesome way to have somebody who seemed really passionate about the game. You know, like, I appreciate all the hurdles you've jumped over to make this possible, Max.
Well, thanks for having me. It's going to be a good time, I'm sure. I'm real excited here. It's going to be this is just a game that I've really come to love since I discovered it at my first Gen Con, 2015. I met a friend there, and he's like, man, I got this great game. You've got to try it. And we went to the hotel bar, and we pulled it out, and I've been hooked ever since. I immediately went and grabbed a copy and haven't looked back.
Oh, of course, man. You love. So, do you still play with the original copy with the loudest dice cups in the world? That's just like shake, 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 shake. You know, like,
is there another way to play it?
No, there's not. Those cups are acoustically designed to annoy. Love them. You just, I'll go play Race for the Galaxy. I don't know. They're the loudest to run across, but that's what I like about it.
Yes. TC loves anything that he can do that disturbs others. So, Roll for the Galaxy, you just told us a little bit, Max, about where your history with the game starts, and that was an awesome way to let us know, just kind of little introduction into this. Before we move on to talk more about it, let's let our listeners know how they can find more things out about the Longview. First of all, thank you so much for listening. You're either listening on YouTube, maybe you're even here for the live chat, like we've got Murr here, who has just become kind of one of the group here for our recordings. Also, those of you that are listening on iTunes, which this will probably be released at some point in the next 5 to 10 months/years. Yeah, we've got quite a backlog going because we try to release 2 a week, not 2 a week. Gosh, that would be incredible.
Jesus Christ.
We are recording. I should almost say we were recording 2 a week, and we're released 2 a month. So do the math for yourself. All we need is 1 month. And then we're like, halfway through the year almost. We're a third of the way through the year. But that just has been it's something that we're gonna be releasing episodes as quick as we can get them out to you. And it's because of TC's amazing dedication that those episodes come out. TC, thank you so much for making the iTunes and other Stitcher and Google Play, which I'm currently working on getting to work. Thank you so much for putting these episodes together.
Yeah, wait till you listen to the new Good, the Bored, and the Ugly intro. It's going to be something else.
It certainly is. It definitely gets you ready for the Mexican standoff or Russians, whatever you want to call it. The standoff where all the people are sitting around the poker game in the Wild West. Everybody's got their gun. Everybody's pointing their gun at somebody different. Yeah, it's kind of like a podcast version of Cash and Guns without any cash involved. So... yeah, thank you for doing that too, TC. So that's TC. He's my co-host. He's my bra, and we have a good time together. We are also at the Longview, sponsored by Game Surplus, which is run by one of the best individuals I've ever met in gaming. He's a real dude, and he's doing his best to make his gaming website where you can purchase games and get them shipped right to your door, sent directly to you. That is gamesurplus.com. The gentleman running it is Carmen. He's got experience all over the industry in sales, and he has had a passion for gaming his whole life. When you buy from Carmen, you are buying to support this community and support some really great content producers. It is much more than an invoice number when you talk with Carmen. He knows you. He knows the games that you're looking for, and he will go the extra mile for you. So that customer service is amazing. Check them out, games@gamesurplus.com. And if we can hopefully get him on this podcast, or not on this podcast, but on the Good, the Board, and the Other, you'll be able to hear his voice and actually hear his perspective and see, where exactly his tastes match up with yours and with the rest of ours. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hopefully having Carmen on one of these podcasts we do in the future. And check him out, games@gamesurplus.com. Just check out their website, gamesurplus.com. They're getting all these Essen releases in. Check them out now. So business is out of the way, gentlemen. We are here to talk about Roll for the Galaxy. It's designed by Tom Lehmann together with some help. It was released in 2014, but that's kind of with an asterisk because the first release of this game was a little bit rough. It came out somewhat at Essen, but a lot of the dice that came out with this game were kind of misprinted, which kind of makes sense because there's a lot of custom components here with Roll for the Galaxy. It's a game that takes Race for the Galaxy and it just really kind of blows it up and sends it in a totally different direction. You have a lot of it's a lot more than your average dice game. When I think about a dice game, I think about, oh, here's going to be the simpler, easier version. That's not the case with Roll for the Galaxy. But you don't want to hear that from me. I'm just a guy who talks a whole lot. You want to hear it from Max, who has some real experience with the game. Max, could you tell us how to play Roll for the Galaxy? And also, as we are talking here, I might interrupt you to try to go deeper and deeper into what you love about this game.
All right. Sure. So Roll for the Galaxy, each player is working to build their own galactic empire. They're going to be, throughout the course of the game, they're going to be settling new worlds, developing new technologies, and shipping and trading some goods for money or victory points. Each turn, you're going to take your cup of dice and you're going to shake it real loud so everybody can hear it. And then you're going to dump it behind your shield. All the dice, you're just saying, have unique faces. Each face represents one of the different phases that can be selected. The 5 phases are explore, develop, settle, produce, and ship. And within those phases, different things might occur. Each die, like I said, though, is unique. Some dice have more explore faces than others. Some might have more shipping and producing faces than others. So each die really kind of works towards the different strategies in the game. If you're working on a settle, develop strategy, you're going to be wanting to get the red military dice because those each have 2 develop and 2 settles on them. So they're really good at doing that, whereas like something like the purple die has 3 ships and it counts as a wild color to help you get more victory points. So I mean, depending on what dice you're collecting over the course of the game kind of helps inform what strategy you might want to go after as you play the game.
Yes, absolutely. So far, everything that you've said makes perfect sense. The dice are definitely shaping what you should be going after, which is...
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that was
after
a
victory
beautiful
points?
transition, right? Yeah.
The correct answer is winning the game.
Yes. I'm sorry. You're going after victory points. So you get victory points by trading your goods in for victory points, and also by building and settling the worlds. However many dice it takes to build the development or the world is how many victory points that will be worth at the end of the game. And when you ship for victory points, you're usually getting between 1 and 3 victory points per good that you're shipping. The game ends when either the pool of victory points is gone from the shipping phase of the game, or when one player builds 12 tiles in front of them, and that includes their 3 starting tiles. That will trigger the end of the game. The player who triggers the end of the game doesn't necessarily win the game, but that is how that goes.
For sure, yeah. You can definitely trigger endgame and lose this game hard.
Yeah, that's happened to me a couple times.
So, what I've got so far is that it has similar qualities to Race for the Galaxy, which of course is the game that it's based on, that there has been a long view episode about, which I highly recommend listeners to check out. It was with the founder of the Long View and previous host, Jeff Gamble. It was an awesome episode about Race for the Galaxy. You should check that out. Anyhow, some of the similarities that I've heard so far are that you are selecting a role simultaneously and secretively. And that is something that where, like, if you select a role, you're going to get a bonus. And this all kind of like harkens back to the initial Euro game that sort of just kind of rebirthed this entire hobby of heavy Euro games, which is Puerto Rico, where you've got a specific mechanic of one person taking an action and getting a benefit, while all other players can take that action as well. Many times, the benefit itself is not worth the opportunity other players get to take the action, but that's up to you. So there's this really interesting sort of like give and take that we're talking about, where when you activate a phase, you could be giving a whole lot to your opponents. And in Roll for the Galaxy, it takes that system and it almost uses the ability to choose a phase and to, like assign your dice as a way to also build dice mitigation into it, if I remember correctly. Does that sound accurate, Max?
Yeah, because essentially you can turn one of your dice into a wild, because you have to use one of your dice in order to select a phase. So I can take like a ship die that, if I have no goods to ship, that die is worthless to me, but I can instead take that die and use it to select like explore if I want. And then I'm getting an extra explore die, and I'm not wasting that die over in ship. So yeah, that's one way to mitigate dice. There's also a dictate power that everybody has, where you can take any one die. You kind of set it off to the side, and it essentially allows you to turn any other die into a wild and place it wherever you need it. So like that kind of luck mitigation is really interesting. Another thing I really like about this game is, you really want to pay attention to what other people are doing, because sometimes, maybe I have a really good roll, but, I look over, at my buddy here, and he's looking like he's getting ready to ship. Maybe I've got this die sitting and develop. I'm not going to develop this turn. Maybe it's worthwhile for me to use a dictate to throw that over to ship, if I really think that's going to happen, just to try and maximize my turn. I think every turn is kind of like a really nice puzzle, and you're just trying to figure out what's the best way to solve this puzzle. And I think everybody kind of solves that puzzle differently, and it's really interesting to see how people do that each turn.
Absolutely, yes. If they can somehow make a coherent thought amid the sound of all the incessant dice like clamoring inside of those cups. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, you're approaching this issue because you've got by the time you're hitting like round 2, round 3, even at the start of the game, you've already started with a specific tableau that's enabling you to roll a specific type of dice. Usually, almost every type of tableau, at the start of the game, you start with like, just like you do in Race for the Galaxy, you have like your starting world. And Roll for the Galaxy even takes those starting roles and starting worlds and kind of pumps them up a little bit by making you get more of them and making them give you even more abilities. Does that sound accurate? Like you got quite a bit of starting resources here in this game. You start the game with 3 out of 12 spaces filled, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's one of the things that we'll talk about the expansion later, but one of the things the expansion really adds is it adds 14 more of those. You're talking about like the double faction, the double-sized faction tiles. You add 14 more of those. That really adds to the variety of it. So you get to the point where you're just not seeing people playing the same strategies because they're not having the same combination of starting worlds, and it's really interesting to see how people develop that based on what they start with. Some of the worlds that you get give you like extra money to start with, and money's important because that's how you buy back your dice for subsequent rounds. So if you're you're building a lot, but eventually your engine's going to die if you're not also making money along the way, which is where shipping kind of the question is, do I ship this for victory points or do I ship this for money? When you ship for money, depending on what worlds you have, it could be a way to make a lot of money at once, and then you can just keep playing for a few more turns until you need to generate money again. The explore phase also has a way to generate money, but it's a constant way to generate money, but it's also a very low amount of money, so it's not really a long-term solution usually.
Yeah, for sure. I think that in this game, you really want to have direction balanced together with your economy. And like you said, in this game, you are using your dice to actually produce and create planets and settle them. But to get those dice, you have to have money. So there's kind of an extra added step taken for those of you that are only familiar with Race for the Galaxy, where you actually do have a money on your board. You track how much money you have, and you have a limit as to how much you can have. And it also does something which is kind of cool that you don't see in Race for the Galaxy, which is that it guarantees that you will never bottom out your economy. You're always going to have at least $1 to spend. And if you ever have only $1, well, sir, woe is you.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty poor play if you have a buck.
But at least nobody ever gets totally stuck. So there's different sort of directions. You've mentioned here that people approach the puzzle here that you've talked about to solve from many different angles. Now, there's kind of different layers of the puzzle from what I've gathered from what you said, Max. You first have the dice that you actually want to compile your civilization with. So how does dice, like we're not talking about like 6-sided dice here.
So you're asking like how you get the different dice?
Well, not just that, but I mean, just let's discuss, like what about these dice, right? What do you start with, and what can you do from that point?
Okay, so you generally start with the basic home dice. They're white. They have 2 explorers, and then each face has one of the other phases on it. And then we were talking about the starting worlds that you get. Some of those starting worlds will also give you other starting dice that will be the different colors, and you can usually use those to try and figure out, what plan. So we kind of discussed the purple one is good for shipping. The red one is good for developing and settling. The alien tech die, the yellow die, is really cool because half of its faces are wilds. So they kind of can add a good amount of reflexibility if you can get a few of those. But they're usually come from pretty expensive worlds. They're not the easiest die to get in your cup.
Some of these dice are prime.
Yeah, they're and then there's some like the brown die and the what is that one? I think it's the blue die that can, like, one of them specializes in developing and the other specializes in settling. So it's just the different colored dice are just really useful for trying to get a certain strategy out. Plus having a lot of the same color of die is still useful even for a production and shipping strategy because you'll get bonus victory points if the colors of your dice also match the color of the world that you're shipping from. So that's one of the big ways to maximize a shipping production strategy, is to try and get as many of the same colored dice as possible.
Yeah, for sure. You want to have, depending on what strategy you're going, kind of like a homogeneous group of dice versus you want to have a diversified group of dice. Well, not necessarily diversified, but like I would say that not every die is really great for every action. And so maybe you want a more diversified group if you want to have more flexibility. Does that sound correct?
Yeah. Yeah, having different dice can definitely help with the versatility. I mean, in the end, it's going to come down to what you roll and then how you're able to best manage what you rolled. Because also, while you're building the developments, a lot of those technologies, some of those can be reassign abilities, which again allow you to make some dice like wilds. And so some of them might be like, you can turn, if you rolled explore dice, you can turn like 2 of them into a wild or something. Or some of them are, you can just take 2 dice from anywhere and you can add them to the phase that you selected. So it can kind of help to make the phase that you're selecting even more powerful, because you're getting to add more dice to essentially more actions to that phase.
Absolutely. I think that because of some of these dice, like for example, let's talk about how the entire, like, just the whole system here of different colored dice is like this steroids version, like turned all the way up version of the differentiation that you saw in planets and Race for the Galaxy. The different planets in Race for the Galaxy were kind of similar to one another, only they just differed in how much money they would sell for, goods produced on them, that is, and how many points they were worth. That's it, because it was kind of a very simple system. Occasionally you had some nice abilities, but they seemed like they were fairly evenly spread out. Here in Roll for the Galaxy, those have been cooked much more into the system itself, as opposed to the unique abilities on every tile in the game. So, as Max has been talking about, you've got yellow dice in the game, which represent the kind of prime best type of die that you could ever have in Race for the Galaxy. The best type of good, it sells for the most. If you have one of those, like, you're going to be swimming in cards. Great, good for you. Here in Roll for the Galaxy, it's not so much that it sells for more, because it does do that, but that's only part of it. That's also giving you a unique die that is kind of honing you more in towards the faces that are on that die. Does that sound accurate, Max?
Yeah. All the faces of the dice are just, that's really what you're looking for. And sometimes you're just looking for a die that will help you with your strategy. And you're looking for, there's a nice chart on the shields that just tells you what every face of the die is. So you can really look at it and try to be like, well, what am I looking for? So then when you're exploring for new tiles, maybe you're going to prioritize, getting a blue world. And if the tile you draw doesn't have a blue world, maybe you'll just turn that into a development, or maybe you'll abandon it later in the hopes of drawing a blue world. Because when you abandon tiles, you can draw extra tiles on top of the ones that you're already drawing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And from what I was saying earlier, I don't think I phrased this perfectly, so let me try to use our user comment coming from Mur here, which is really well worded. When you go for a certain color of die, you need to know that, like, the same way that in Race for the Galaxy that you had a specific type of die that sometimes hones you in for a specific strategy, here it's like the quote-unquote better your die is, the more flexibility it gives you. As I mentioned earlier, your best die, quote unquote, is a yellow die. And that doesn't really have a specialization. Most of the faces on that die tend to be wild faces, or it's weighted towards wild faces, which are wonderful. But they are definitely, like, let's think about it like this. You're sacrificing efficiency for flexibility. So you really need to be able to sort of make up for that in your tableau somewhere. Yes, you've got this amazing flexibility coming from a yellow die, but if you've already built a red tableau that's really good at settling more planets and just, that's kind of the military in this game, right? I mean, military in this game is represented by a specific color of die. Would you say that's correct, Max?
Yeah, the military is represented by the red die. There are no military worlds in the sense, like, none of the worlds are colored red. Every world is either is one of, like, the main colors, so the green, the blue, and the yellow, or they're gray. And the gray worlds, unlike in Race, they never produce a good. I guess I'm thinking of Windfall.
In Race, they don't do that either. Yeah, Race is
right,
kind of similar.
The Windfall. Right, but they never produce, like, there is no Windfall world in Roll. Like, the gray will just never have a world, but sometimes the gray worlds will have, like, a red die. But yeah, the red dice are definitely the main ones. If I'm trying to build things as quickly as possible, try to run the clock out, the red die is usually the die that I look for.
Absolutely. So that's allowing you some flexibility in terms of how you're going to be honing in your tableau. Other colors of dice here that are present are going to be your blue worlds, your brown worlds, your green worlds, and your yellow worlds, which are all previously seen types of dice that correspond at least to a specific color of world from Race for the Galaxy. However, like I've said before, there are some really sort of interesting and embedded differences between these worlds, and they're much more so than just blue world goods sell for cheaper than yellow world goods. So blue worlds look like they are much more for just trying to like run the clock out by getting the most victory points. Does that sound accurate?
I mean, some of them are the blue worlds. They tend to be cheaper. So yeah, you can build more of them to try and run the clock out. You're not going to get as many points, so that's kind of the risk reward on those.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the worlds are interesting too. It's like, in addition to giving you a die, they'll also give you money to try and help you get money, while you're doing the settle and develop strategy, because otherwise you're just not going to make tons of money with that strategy. So they try to help build something into that to help you get some money. The blue worlds and the yellow worlds have that a bit. The green worlds as well. I don't see it very much in the brown worlds though. Money.
Yeah, it does seem like the brown worlds are much more focused on development.
Yeah.
So so these tiles, though, Mer, I don't think we've talked about yet how these tiles become available to you. So, here we don't have a hand of cards for those of you coming from Race for the Galaxy. I'm making a lot of comparisons to Race because I know that a lot of players that have been in the hobby a long time have played that. Now, if you're totally new, I apologize that these comparisons might be kind of going over your head. And we'll address the comparison between Race and Roll a little bit later on. But just to keep it focused here on what we're talking about, in Race for the Galaxy, you had cards. It was a card game, and you actually used cards to pay for other cards. You would add a card to your tableau, paying for it in the cost of other cards. Now here you don't have cards, so how does that whole thing work out? Like, here instead we've got dice, but obviously a dice isn't going to represent a unique tile. So, Max, could you tell me, how are the tiles obtained by players, and how are they finished, completed?
Yeah. So, when the explore phase happens, every die that you place into your citizenry. So whenever you spend a die doing any action, it goes into your citizenry. That's where it'll sit until you have the money to buy it back at the end of the turn. So every die you place in there, you can do one of two things. You can get money when you explore, or you can scout. And so for every die you place in there, you scout, you get one tile. There is also, we kind of mentioned the abandon ability earlier. You can take tiles from previous turns that you've been working on building there. You can discard those, and then however many you discard, you draw that many more. So you draw 1 plus X. And so then you'll take all those, and they're all double-sided. They're all double-sided. One's a world, the other side is a development. And so every time you look at a tile, it's a decision, is this development better than the world? What do I want on this tile? Once you've picked out what you want, you take the tiles that you're adding to the tiles you're already building on your little board in front of you, and they'll go underneath the tiles that you've been working on. And then later on, when you get to like the develop and then the settle phase, when the develop phase, obviously, so what happens is all the dice that you have there, you'll take all the dice from your develop phase that you've selected there, and you'll just put them onto your tiles at the development. And if your dice equal the number on the tile, it'll be built. So if I have 5 dice in my development and the development costs 5, I'd place those 5 dice on that tile. You count it out, make sure it matches. You then place that development out, and now that development is active. Its special powers take effect if applicable. And then those 5 dice that you had there will now move to your citizenry. Now it's possible to build more than one. If I have 5 dice in my development, my first development costs 2. I'd place 2 on there. Those 2 go into my citizenry. I build that tile, and now the next 3 go on to the next tile in line if there is a tile. And if I can build that, I build that. If not, those dice will sit there, and then on a future turn when I add more development dice, you'll build that tile as well. And settling's the exact same thing, only it's the circles. Only the circles can settle. But it's the exact same process.
Yeah, for sure. You've done a great job of outlining how tiles are acquired and then how tiles are eventually settled. So if I recall correctly, whenever you're exploring tiles, you are able to pitch any tiles you dislike from before. And I think you went into that, how you can kind of hone your strategy and do something, even go to the point of pursuing a strategy that advanced gamers such as yourself and especially Mur in our comments have called the big dig strategy, where you like just basically spend the first several rounds of the game coming up with this queue of tiles that you're going to then spend the last part of the game purposefully rattling off because you've got sort of like a combo already made. And that seems to me like really you're selling me on this system. Like I've not played as many games of Roll for the Galaxy as I probably should have, but I'm really interested in what you have to say, Max, about that big dig strategy. How much do you think that's something that people will pursue if they are a more advanced player?
I mean, what the interesting about that is, like, yeah, you can really kind of set up your later turns if you because usually what a lot of like newer players can do is they'll just draw maybe 1 or 2 tiles at a time, and that doesn't leave them as much choice as to what they're building. They might just be building brown worlds and green worlds just because that's what they drew. But if you can really build that up and dig through a huge mass of tiles, you can really start to be like, all right, I want these things ordered like this and that, and try to make a synergy as you build them.
Are you allowed to reorder the structure of that stack, or is that pretty much set in stone once you get it going?
It's once they've been placed at the end of the phase, you can't touch them unless you have like I don't think there's a special ability. There's a special ability where you can place your new tiles on top of what's already there, but generally speaking, yeah, once the phase is done, those tiles are stuck there. When you abandon tiles, you can abandon them from anywhere within the stack, so that's kind of a way to reorder it, but you can't just put things wherever you want willy-nilly after they've been there for a turn. Yeah,
you have to pretty much just it's kind of making it a more tactical decision that you're making when you draw those tiles, unless you have a special ability. It's and it's almost like you're playing Bonanza there with your tile abandons. You're like, these have to go in this specific order, which is kind of an interesting thing we don't see all too much. So really, really great so far, Max, is what you've told us about how each of these different phases can sort of contribute to this strategy of getting a lot of these planets out. Now, we haven't yet addressed one of the specific colors of dice, which I think would make sense to also talk about that when we're discussing the last 2 phases that you go through in each round, because those are one of the main ways to sort of utilize what tableau you've built to generate points. And that color of die is purple dice, and they are known as the consume dice. Would you please let us know specifically what that entails, together with the phases that they correspond to?
Sure. So yeah, the purple die is the consumption dice, like you said, and the big deal with that die is that it essentially counts as a wild color when it's used as a good or as a ship. So the way you get victory points when you ship is you take a look at the tile that you've got the product on, and you look at the color. And if the good matches that color, you get +1 victory point. And if the ship matches that color, you get another victory point. So, I mean, you always get at least 1 victory point. If you have 2 mismatched die with the world, you'll still get a victory point if you want. But if you have both of those things matching the world, you'll get 3 victory points. So the purple die is great because you can just for maximum victory points with those.
Yeah, for sure. That is the way to try to churn out victories with the shipping. So what do you find yourself pursuing more, Max? Because we've talked so far about sort of a balanced strategy, and we've also talked here about the more consume heavy strategy where you're getting points through shipping, producing goods and shipping them. And I would also add to that there's like the inverse of the shipping strategy tends to be your military strategy, which is just getting as many planets out as quickly as possible, low victory points, but rush the game end. Do you find yourself balanced in what you pursue, or do you find yourself favoring any of those paths to victory?
I think balanced paths are really good. But I think you're going to lean one way or the other. I mean, when you're working towards a production and shipping strategy, you still need to build the worlds in order to be able to have worlds to ship from. So, otherwise you're just like shipping one good and every other turn. That's 3 victory points every other turn. People are going to be able to build faster than that. So, I mean, you really have to build in order to cash in on the production shipping strategy. I also like the planning involved in the production shipping strategy, so I'm a little partial to those. But I mean, if you're having a hard time getting your engine up, somebody that's just develop, settle, and exploring and getting money, they can just plow the game through like right as you're getting your engine up and knock you out on points.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting. So we've got these different paths to victory, but it seems like there's a lot more here than just you pursue one strategy. Like you said, it sounds like a balanced approach is what you tend to pursue more, but that's just because I think that, if you look at it statistically, you're gonna probably draw tiles that come from both sides here. You're gonna probably draw some tiles that are better for settling worlds and some tiles that are better for producing and shipping goods. And as we've heard, as I just read in the comments here from Mur, he pursues whatever victory the tiles tell him to go with. So would you say, Max, that in that respect, that the best, the reason that big dig strategy is so, I guess, enticing for experienced players is just that you do have that much control over not being so much capped by tiles that you have to get done before other ones underneath? Also, do you find yourself ever in a situation where you have like an expensive tile that's holding you back from getting your engine going?
Yeah. I mean, one thing we didn't quite go over, but when you start the game, in addition to those starting tiles that you have built, you also get 2 tiles that you're going to be the ones that you're going to start building. One's going to be a world and one's going to be development. And in games where sometimes you draw them, and whichever way you put them, they're just going to be really high point worlds. And some people, they'll sit there and they'll just try to build those early off, but it really kind of stunts their growth.
Yes.
I think a better strategy would be to just dump those early on, even though they might be really good ones, and try to get something a little bit cheaper. And also, when you're dumping those, you're kind of adding to that big stack that you're going to be working on. It helps to inform your strategy later in the game, earlier, so you know what you're working on, earlier rather than later, because that can be kind of rough. Sometimes people go through games and they're kind of half working on a strategy, and then they draw something and then they start half working on another strategy, and usually that just results in middling points. And it might not be terrible, but they're usually they're probably not going to win.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you had mentioned that, because it's almost the exact opposite in Race for the Galaxy, because there are these 6 cost development tiles, which I know still exist in Roll for the Galaxy, and they've actually simplified the scoring system in Roll so that the cost of the tile is just how many points it's worth. There isn't like these separate values. But in Race for the Galaxy, usually I'm always fishing for a 6 cost development, which are generally your end game point scoring tiles. And I want to be able to just stick that at the back of my hand and get an engine going where I know that I'm building towards that. So what you're telling me is that sort of a system exists in Race for the Galaxy, only it's not something that you're doing as you're doing everything else. It's more like you want like this stack already built before you ever start working towards it. So I think that might be where I had erred in my first games of Roll for the Galaxy. I was coming at it from this mindset with Race where I'm like, as soon as I have a good 6 tile, you don't pitch that. Like if I pitched a 6, like there's a very small amount. Only 1 in every 10 cards in Race for the Galaxy is a 6 cost development. If I get a 6 cost development, I'm always evaluating can I build my tableau towards it? Whereas in Roll for the Galaxy, it's more like if it comes up at the right time, You can put it at the bottom of that stack, but you never want to have a 6-cost development tile that you don't have a specific path to achieving. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, because they can just really slow you down, and then maybe if you're building it early enough, maybe you're not even going to be working towards it, and so now, I mean, you've got this big points, but you also kind of are falling back in the race to end the game, just because of the amount of resources you put into building it, and usually those 6-cost ones aren't giving you money back, so you're still going to have you've spent all these resources building it, and now you got to spend all these resources to get the dice back in order to build something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What an interesting system. I mean, that way you're able to be so much more purposeful. I mean, during the beginning of the game, it's like you're only taking tiles that you're okay with being sort of at the top of your stack. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you're taking tiles. I also, I try to get money to get as many dice as I can in my cup to maximize my turns. I don't want to be rolling 1 or 2 die a turn, so I'm trying to get tiles, but at the same time I want to be able to get dice back in my cup to continue that momentum.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to have the economy, just at least the starting capital to be able to get your whole system and engine that you've built running. So we've talked about the differences between these dice. We've talked about how the phases are selected. One thing that's interesting that we haven't yet mentioned that was talked about a little bit in the comments is that you do have a dice screen, as you mentioned earlier, Max, and there's quite a bit of trust that results in players rolling a handful of dice behind. It's kind of like, ooh, yeah, you know what, this yellow die, it has enough wild symbols for me to just kind of fudge this one. Ooh, I nudged it. Look, it's wild.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people bring that up, it's just kind of par for the course with it, but I don't know. I mean, the way I look at it is basically I don't play with cheaters, and if somebody really wants to cheat to win, then that's their prerogative, I guess. If I catch them red-handed, then there's an issue. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to assume that everybody's, working towards the same goal, and that's to have a good, competitive, fun game.
Exactly. If you are going to be cheating and counting that as a win in your book, then you have problems that are bigger fish than I can fry.
Yeah, I'm not going to let that, stop my enjoyment of the game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think it's a valid criticism. I think it's interesting. It's one of those, and I don't mean to start a rant here, but it's one of those things that people point to as a reason they dislike a system. And I would say that if you're the person saying that specifically, that comes off as a bit paranoid. It really does. Like, if you've had a bad experience, that's probably an issue within that player. I think that considering that there's nothing on the line here aside from everybody's enjoyment, which is absolutely tied to the fact that we all trust each other. Like, trust is a big issue in board games in general. I mean, like, you have to just trust that your group is going to be an entertaining and at least include you and be an inclusive group for you. I mean, there's a lot of trust in the line, and if you find out somebody's a cheater, that kind of like, I don't know, it can cause you to sort of question everything about whether or not you like to play with that person. So I really think that, like, when people point to this and say, oh, it's a system that breeds cheating, no. Cheating is not like analysis paralysis. Like, somebody's sitting there and waiting for forever on their turn. There are game systems, I feel, that do breed this sort of like, if there's too much information flooding a person at the same time, they can sit there and just be like, what do I do? Cheating is different. Cheating is something that no matter what, in your heart of hearts whether or not you're doing it. And if you come into a situation where you're like, well, I'm really not sure, like, I accidentally, this die, I don't remember what it was, I nudged it, you tell the table, hey, I had this die here, I honestly don't remember what it was. Is it okay if I re-roll it? Otherwise, I'm just going with what it is. Otherwise, I don't know where to go with this. And I mean, when it comes down to it, like, that trust, it's imperative to so much more than just a specific game's outcome, that it like I said, bigger fish than I can fry. Would you agree with that, Max?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, TC, you kind of had some chiming in about that cheating behind screens. What do you think about that?
I just see it as a possibility. It's nothing against the game. I just know I play with people who like, there's certain people that I've played with who are like, oh, that looks questionable. So your win is a win with an asterisk. I'm like, okay, whatever. Then I'm more inclined to cheat just to make sure I never play with that person ever again. But that's just where I stand.
Yes, that's right. If you criticize TC, he will take it and he will turn it against you, and you will feel the knife in your back soon.
But that's just something that I've heard it quite a bit. It's like, well, yeah, you know, if I don't know what you're doing behind your screen, I'm like, wow, you have issues.
I would compare this to, like, as a teacher, I'm a high school teacher of the classroom. I'll tell you this: you have to assume and actually believe that everybody there is doing what is right. You know, that nobody there is violating rules. That if they do so, it is inadvertent. That it is a mistake. And if you do that, you will get the best from people. If you go into it with a paranoid mindset that everybody out there is trying to win at any cost, then you're going to have people cheat on you. Well, cheat during your game. If people are cheating on you outside of that, then I guess I kind of feel bad for you. But the thing is, you're going to have people cheat during your game simply because, like TC said, you don't trust them anyway. So if there's no trust to lose, then who cares about cheating?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
and I play games like Twilight Imperium where it's just so complicated that you're going to make mistakes and you could cheat. Like, oh, I could build all this stuff. How? You know?
Yeah, like one of those late games where you look at somebody's tableau and you're like, holy crap, how did you do all that so quick? You know, especially with how focused you are in your own game here, Max. I think one thing that we've not really gone into is how the play here in Roll for the Galaxy is simultaneous in most cases. You're not usually waiting on other players to do something, correct?
Yeah. It is all simultaneous, and you know, for the first few games, you're probably all gonna want to make sure you're doing things at the same time. Everybody roll their dice, set it up. All right, now everybody do explore, everybody do develop, etc. Once you get far enough along, everybody can basically just do things at their pace. You just have to do everything in order. As long as everybody's doing everything in order, everybody can just go at their own pace, and then all you have to do is just wait for people to finish up the last round, and then once everybody's ready, you start the next round. You just go. And it really speeds up play once you get to that point where everybody can just go at their own pace.
Absolutely.
It's a big selling point to me.
And it's amazing when everyone rolls their dice at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, another nice thing about that,
you need a loudspeaker there, TC.
Once I'm set up, I can kind of, we take our cup and we set it, upside down to indicate when we're done and ready for everybody to go. And so once, I'm set up, I can do that. And then I can kind of get up and I can go and help out the new players that are still learning the game while they're still setting up. It's not like some games where you like in Race, for example. If I can't really go help you and look at your hand of cards because then I'm just going to know what you have. Whereas in Roll, every turn, what's behind your shield is going to be different. So me helping you maximize this turn till you learn the game isn't really going to affect things beyond this turn. And I've already set up my turn. I'm not changing things after the fact.
Holy moly, Max, you just sold me on that. That is amazing because you are so correct in saying that. Race for the Galaxy is a pain in the butt to learn, and there's not much help you can be somebody because every time you see what's in their hand, there's so much information there that it's now in asterisks, as TC said earlier. However, in Roll, what you have is kind of public knowledge. Like what you've rolled isn't public knowledge, but if somebody's done with their turn, as you said, you put your dice cup face down in front of you, and that indicates that you're done. Does it say to do that in the rule book? Because I thought that we were just all geniuses for coming up with that in my group.
I don't think it says that in the rule book.
It's just like this etiquette that everybody kind of learns almost right away playing Roll, where it's like, okay, we roll our dice, we put our dice cup face up, and then once we're done selecting our stuff, we put our dice cup face down, and now you can go around helping people maximize their turns. That is ingenious, Max. Maybe that's one of the main reasons that Roll has got so many more people involved in. I think people won't play Race with other individuals, or people have negative experiences playing Race because of how difficult it is, because of how difficult the system is, and how little help you're able to give each other. In Roll for the Galaxy, though, I find that it is much easier, almost on level of being a gateway game, because of how much the system just in general has kind of ironed out a couple of the kinks. Would you agree with that?
I also really like, that, they do have some of the iconography, but on every tile, it also explains that iconography. So I can just look at a tile, and if I know what the iconography means, I just know what that tile does. Or if I'm new to the game, I can read it out, and then if I have a question, I can ask it. But usually it makes sense, and you just, boom, I got it. I know what this tile does. And I think that cuts down. I remember, I played race, and I'm just having to look at the card, then look at the key, then look at the card, then look at the key, and do that for my whole hand all the time. It was not the easiest learning experience.
For sure. I would also like to add that one of the main things, and I hadn't even considered this, Max, I got to tell you, full disclosure, going into this, I came into this with this idea that, like, I've played a lot of race. I then played roll. Roll made me feel impatient. I went back to race, and then eventually I got sick of race because I felt like, the cards, if you don't have the cards, there's nothing you can do. And I just kind of got, like, sick of that system. But what you've done here is you've opened up my mind to a lot of what roll has done to sort of, quote unquote, fix race. It is a much newer game. Let's be honest. There's a lot of things that the designer can go in and say, well, this is something that I am sick of, having played it, however many 100 times, and I want to try to make that not happen so much in roll. And I would say that one of the biggest things is that in a multiplayer setting, well, in a race game, in the Race for the Galaxy, you have this 2-player advanced game where the game goes faster because you actually select 2 phases. And that makes the gameplay different. It not only speeds up the game, it just makes it different. There's a lot of different combinations that you're able to do. However, in the base game, because the ability to get a large amount of cards and actually sell your cards is tied to being the individual, it's tied to a special ability. It's not tied, let me say it like this. When you select a phase, you get a bonus. Well, getting lots of money is a bonus in race, meaning that if you're not the one who selected the phase and that phase happens, you could end up turning your nest egg of economy for the late game into a single point. And that can be one of the most depressing situations when you accidentally, early game, consume an expensive good for a single point. And roll has fixed that system. You no longer have to take the bonus to sell a good, correct? Like when you ship a good, you either choose that you're going to take points or you're going to take money, correct? Does that sound accurate, or am I forgetting something?
No, that's correct.
So it's cooked right into the system. You no longer have to sell your goods, specifically selecting that phase. You can end up in these sort of like stalemates in race, where like neither person wants to take the settle action to get that card settled because they're worried the other player is then going to take the sell action and force them to consume this good that they're actually getting economy from.
I mean, the other big difference in roll to race is they did change the ordering of production and shipping. Production now happens before shipping. So if one player chooses to produce and another player chooses to ship, that'll all happen on one turn.
Yes, that's right. You are able to actually make things happen in a turn. And I didn't even think about how that affects the system. But it definitely changes it. And I think it makes more things possible and just makes it, in essence, a much more logical game where you're not having to plan 2 turns in advance every turn. Now, that can be kind of attractive to some players, planning 2 turns in advance. But I don't think, honestly, that with how Race for the Galaxy, as you guys have mentioned, is a largely tactical game based on what tiles you're drawing. I don't know if that, having to plan several turns in advance is necessarily rewarded with all the tactical decisions. I think that like you said, this system is not only more intuitive, it just much more suits its, the weight that roll is meant to be. What's just so strange about this, Max, is I did not see myself as being a convert. And you've already won me over. Yes, tell me more. No, don't just tell me more, but I want to hear more about, like, I want to start talking now about how this system has been expanded. If you feel like this is a good time to merge over into the expansion, which there's been one of. Is there any things that you'd like to talk about, specifically base race, before we start talking about its expansion called Ambition?
I'll just say, so my biggest complaint with the base game was the very limited number of starting tiles. That my friends and I do is, you know, for those starting tiles, we give everybody 2 of them. So that way people can make a choice. They can kind of start building their engine just that much quicker. And people don't just get screwed over by getting, quote unquote, the weaker tile, if you're just giving everybody 1 tile. Now in the base game, you can only do that with up to 4 players because there's only 9 of the faction tiles, if I'm remembering right. And so once you get 5 players, you just have to give everybody that single tile, and that's what they get. With the expansion, you're adding, I think it was like 14 more of those double wide tiles. And, you know, with that, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could give everybody like 3 of those and draft them. Or you know, whatever you want to do. That was the biggest selling point of the expansion to me. Like, all they had to do was that, and I was going to be sold on the expansion. But not only did they do that, but they also added 2 new dice. The leader die is a black die, and it replaces one of the starting white dice in your cup.
So you always have
and
it.
Then there's also you always start with it. Yes.
Yeah.
The other die is the old die. Have one thing in common, is that some of their faces have 2 phases pictured on them. So like, for example, it might have like the picture for explore and the picture for produce. So the cool thing about that is you can place that die in either spot, and if that phase is selected, then that's where it is. If that phase is not selected, but the other phase picture on the die is selected, that die just shifts over to the other phase and will work there. So it's just like, it's just really cool how, you know, you can kind of be like, I can hedge my bets. Like, I'm like, you know, I would really like to do this thing, but if this other thing maybe occurs, I'd be cool with that. So maybe I'll stick it over, you know, and produce, because I'm pretty sure that explore is going to happen. And if produce happens, great. And if it doesn't, then guess what? That die is just going to shift right over to explore, and now I'm still happy.
Yeah, you've got flexibility, but now you've got flexibility in the faces on a single die, but it's kind of a more specified flexibility. It's not just a wild die where you're stuck doing something. If that phase doesn't happen, like you mentioned, now you can actually move it. That's a new dimension.
Right, and it's really cool, y'all. Like, I can just make it where I want it, or I can kind of hedge my bets on if I would, one thing like I wouldn't mind happening versus one thing I really want to happen. You know, if I'm selecting explore, you know, I can throw it over in the production, and then I'm guaranteed no matter what happens, either it's going to produce or it's going to explore. Like, either way, I know it's going to do something for me.
Yes.
The other thing it adds is the $sign face. And what that is you'll get, you know, the picture of the phase and then a $sign. And then if you use that die for that particular phase, when that die would go into your citizenry, it instead just pays for itself and goes immediately into your cup.
Ooh, yes.
So you can, you know, be more efficient. So with what you're doing on that, so like the orange dice have the $sign on the production and on the ship. So if I can get, you know, one orange die as like a yellow product and like another orange die as a ship on that turn or a future turn, and, you know, instead of getting 1 victory point, I can now get $6 plus those 2 dice just pay for themselves, you know, just maximizing the money you're making for that. But it also works. The leader die has some of those for the exploring, develop, and settling phase. So in those phases where, like, especially the developing settle, where you're usually not making money, you know, you're able to just buy that die right back and re-roll it. If
yeah, so you don't end up with this economy grinding to a halt, as we've mentioned before.
So those are my favorite things about the expansion. Now, the expansion does also add what they call objectives, and as you complete those, you'll get what are called talent counters, and those you can either save for victory points at the end of the game, or you can use them as like a wild die in during the selection phase to get extra actions.
Do you generally find yourself playing with all parts of the expansion, or do you leave some parts out?
I don't really play with the objectives. I'm not a huge fan of objectives in games in general. I feel like it kind of pushes people towards a certain strategy.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of like the free form of building what I think's best. Like, what's the most efficient engine I can build versus should I build a slightly less efficient engine to try and meet this random goal? It's just, I don't know. It's not something that I don't really play with it, but I think it's an interesting thing because I do like that it adds those talent counters that, you know, then there's an interesting choices. Do I want to use this now for like an immediate benefit, or should I save it for the end of the game for victory points and hope that those, you know, knock me over the top?
That's really interesting, Max, how you're like, you know, it's almost like ill-gotten gains. Like, it's something that's cool once players have them, but how they get them sucks a little bit. You know, it's like kind of random. And when you've got a game that's about such tactical decisions, well, when you're trying to set aside these arbitrary goals, then players can't be quite as free to puzzle out what is the best thing to do with the tiles they've drawn. Yes?
Right. That's exactly my thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that it's kind of similar in Race for the Galaxy's objectives. They were just straight up points. So they didn't even have, you know, this extra added like cool layer with talents. It was just like you get X amount of points. Mm-hmm. And thus, like, you know, you play a few games with them and you're like, well, you just got that objective not because you made the better choices, but because you got lucky with those cards, which then after you play enough race eventually gets to be the way that you feel about the cards in general. When you know, when there's that much of a level of random number generator involved, you feel kind of like, you know, especially with people of equal skill, there's not so many decisions being a part of it. It sounds to me like roll is just decisions here, decisions there, decisions everywhere. Add even more decisions in when you've got these extra added new, you know, like you can actually start drafting at the beginning of the game with your starting planet. You've also got these new dice that, if I remember, you're telling us that they can pay for themselves if used for their specific bonus, but also aren't these like really good die in general where they're just kind of like extremely powerful dice because they both can count as, no matter what the color of the world is, they both can count as that color. Does that sound accurate?
The black die does.
Okay.
So one thing to kind of note as a cool graphic design note, which I didn't fully appreciate until the other day when I was rereading the rules. If you look at each die on its production face, a different little rectangles colored in. So for example, you look at the white die, none of the rectangles are colored in.
Yes.
You look at the blue die, the upper left rectangle's colored in, and they're all colored in black. So then you get to the black die and the whole thing's black. It's all colored in. So you kind of, it's like, boom, that die is everything. And so when you look at the orange die, none of them are colored in.
Oh my God. So it's like colorblind people, colorblind individuals can remember that maybe, you know, where it's like, it's the upper left. And maybe they did that in some ways to try to make these, you know, not only does the dice face unique, but also it just kind of helps maybe with that aspect. I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing something that's not there though.
I mean, it totally could. You know, like I said, I didn't really think about that until really recently when I was rereading the rules, and I, you know, because I was looking at it and I saw, oh, those ones are all different ones colored in, and then I just kind of realized that the black die being black and they're all colored in, it just means it counts as anything, kind of like the purple die. It's essentially a wild color for it, and I just thought that was a really cool user interface thing that I just never noticed playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this game in general, like Race for the Galaxy, Roll for the Galaxy, they've really been known and outstanding in the industry for how well they've developed like a symbology, like, you know, the way that it works. And I think that even people commend Roll for the Galaxy for taking the amazingly complex and enriched system of symbology that makes Race for the Galaxy so functional. Such a heavy and complicated game, functional in card game format. Roll for the Galaxy takes that and somehow makes it accessible.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that's one of the big selling points for this game is, you know, I think it takes a game to really get it, but you can kind of see the gears clicking as people are playing the game for the first time is you kind of go around and, you know, like I'll look at somebody's dice and I'll be like, you know, what do you want to do? And I can kind of show them sometimes like a more efficient way to do it. And you kind of like, they go, oh, you know, I never thought about it that way. And, you know, then next time they'll just, boom, they know what to do as they play the game. And it's really cool to see their light bulbs go off.
Absolutely, yeah. New players are enjoying the experience in Roll for the Galaxy, something that definitely is not the case in every game of Race for the Galaxy. So we've talked here, Max, about some of the best features. I think that, you know, the fact that Race, the base game of Race, has, you know, just sort of reinvented the system of producing simultaneous selection, role selection. You know, like here we've also added dice, but you've got unique dice that are each are acquired through actually developing or settling worlds, and most of the time settling, but in a system that's just been totally reworked to actually get, you know, arguably a much more deep and rewarding experience from a die than from a card, which is kind of unique and just kind of special.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying earlier, usually you think of a you know, something the dice game, and it's usually a semi dumbed down version of a game. And with this, it's kind of like a peer to Race for the Galaxy. I don't think it's probably not heavier, but it definitely feels, you know, like a similar weight class to me.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps it is less of a hurdle to get into, but offers the same amount of depth, which really would make it something that I need to give more of a chance. I just got so accustomed to the 2-player version of Race, with how quickly it develops, you know, how quickly you can start and end the game. And playing Race with multiplayers, like just playing multiplayer Race, is very difficult for me. I get really frustrated by just how slowly the game develops. And then Roll for the Galaxy works largely the same way. However, I think that because they've ironed out a lot of, or not just ironed out, but like they've sanded down a lot of those rough edges that could result in the, you know, situations where players are kind of stuck, where their economy's grinded to a halt, or where they just, you know, can't get the right cards and stuff. I think you're seeing a lot more, I don't know, purposeful decisions being made throughout the entire experience. And I think that, you know, the system of multiplayer works. You know, you don't have any pitfalls like I mentioned earlier in Roll, where you can't sell a die because you're worried that somebody's going to force you to consume it, right? You're able to just make that as a choice. And that to me just seems so pivotal to making it work with multiplayer. It seems like just a nice touch. And then another aspect here that you mentioned about the expansion, holy crap, man. 14 tiles. How many tiles came in the base game for Home Planets, for the double tiles?
So the double wides were 9. There were let me see. Yeah, there were
That's
9
a pretty
of each. There
good
were 9
chunk,
of the
though,
double,
still.
double wide and 9 of the home. Right. All right. It's nice, but like I said, you know, it just wasn't enough to give to do that, like give people the choice at the beginning of the game, which I really like. Now that I've played this game so much, I really like having that choice and kind of looking at the tiles and trying to think, you know, what strategy do I want to go with this game, and seeing what meshes together. And then, yeah, the expansion adds 14 of those double wides and 7 of the just the single home world starting tiles.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, you're talking about more than double. And the thing is, let's face it here. You know, all the other tiles get thrown into a bag, but the tile that you are using the most, is arguably the most important single tile in the game, is that double tile. And that is what they have just blown up to absolutely incredible proportions. Like, Race for the Galaxy was especially criticized, and I would jump onto the criticism train here, for how light the expansions were on adding content, like actual cards. Like, the first expansion came with, like, oh man, like 15 to 20 cards. Hardly any cards got shuffled in. And I mean, that kind of makes sense, because ultimately, you know, you want the pool of tiles that you're drawing from to be predictable. You know, you don't want to be stuck drawing a tile that you can't use. and or drawing a card that you can't use. Now, it's less of a deal in race because so many cards are just discarded for payment, but that doesn't happen in roll. In roll, every tile kind of needs to be useful. And oh, one thing we didn't even talk about yet, Max, those tiles are double-sided.
Right. I think I did mention, yeah, they're double-sided. One each side.
We haven't worn it out, though.
We haven't discussed it. Yeah, no. Yeah. Each side, one side is a settlement, and the other side is a development. And so every time you draw a tile, like, you're looking at it and you're going, you know, some of those developments, some of those powers are just really cool. And, you know, sometimes like the other side's that perfect die that you really want, and maybe it's just the right amount. You know, maybe it's like, oh, I can build this easily. But then you look at the other side and you're like, man, you know, I'd really love to have like some of them are just like extra victory points when you consume. It's like, man, I'm working on the shipping strategy. I really just want to have this thing to get extra victory points for the end of the game, make my shipping strategy even more efficient. And it's like, which side do I pick?
Absolutely. There's a development on one side and a world on every side. So you never have that issue where you're like, I can't draw any developments. I can't draw any worlds. Another issue that I have with race that is fixed with roll that I hadn't even considered because of the structure of the actual game. You don't even think about those things. They just kind of like, when you play the game, they just kind of happen, right?
Oh yeah, it's all very intuitive. I think it's I don't know. I'm really impressed with the design of this game. I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I can't believe you actually won me over here because I was so certain that I was going to be ending this and that it would be like kind of like an earlier episode where I waited until the very end, never really said my thoughts, and then our guest kind of noticed like that I was being very cordial, which is not generally my temperament. Cordial is, yeah, my in-laws would love me to be more cordial, but but I think you know for real, dude. Like I haven't put roll in my collection, and I haven't really sought it out. But at this point, I'm thinking this is an issue that I want to rewind in time to when I remember seeing roll for sale on like Black Friday last year. And I wish I had bought it and the expansion because these just seem to me like necessary pieces. Like would you say that you do not play without that black die?
I always miss it so at game night, I don't always bring my copy because my friends have copies now. So when I go and play with them, sometimes it's the base game. But I still enjoy it. Like I said, the thing that I most miss is just the extra variety for those starting tiles. But yeah, the black die is a lot of fun. I really, like I said, I really do like the double what was that? The double phases on those dice. I think that's just a really cool layer when I roll that die and I have that extra choice of, you know, do I want to put it here or here? And either way, it's probably going to do something good for me. And I do enjoy that a lot. I don't necessarily think I think the expansion is necessary if you're going to play the game a lot. I think just learning the game, you don't need it. But once you come to like the game, you're going to want all those extra choices. It's going to really enhance your love of the game.
And it is kind of nice that it's designed to be modular. You know, like you can just add the black die, right, without adding anything else, correct?
Yeah, you can. Now one thing is like some of the extra the extra tiles that you throw into the bag, some of those tiles actually give you extra white dice because they know that now that you have this black die instead of that white die that would normally never be used, now it's something that can actually be bought from the bag just to get another die to roll.
Yes, because normally there's only enough white dice to give everybody their home dice, to start the game, and then you can't get any more, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, there are no more. And so because the game only comes with enough dice to be exactly what's needed. So if you drew every tile that would give you blue dice in the game and they were all built, there's just enough blue dice that you won't run out.
Well, it would make sense that an efficiency game has been, optimized for production. So and right. not any surprise there. What I really would equate this black die to in Roll for the Galaxy is actually to this date, my favorite dice game in existence, and one of my favorite games, one of my top 5 games, Trois. I'm not sure if either of you guys are familiar with it, but its base game had several dice that had different functions. And then with the expansion, they added a wild die that everybody started with that just, made so much more things possible. And it just, it feels like one of those things where once you have it, you just, like, even if I'm not playing with the expansion, just give me some random, different color of die, and we all get it, and it'll just be our leader dice. It's kind of that same sort of leader mechanism, and I really think that's so simple it seems obvious, but man, does that work. And it's even better developed and better realized because it's a die that works because it's not only wild, but it's got these extra faces that make it more economically beneficial. So,
right. I mean, it's definitely like one of the best dice in the game. Whenever I'm buying my dice from the Citizen and I don't have enough money to buy them all, the black die is always one I'm going to spend the money on if it's in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's the one that you put in. Like it's kind of a, I would hesitate to choose my dice unless my black one's there. Then it's just automatic, right? And then I guess there are certain ones, like if you've got a white die versus a yellow die, you're going to take the yellow die, right? I mean, you would just take the wild die over the die that has everything, but you're going to be kind of limited just in case you roll poorly, right? In case you roll against what you're going for. So, but like we've talked about, there's systems for dice mitigation here. You've got your same things that people know and love about Race for the Galaxy, and even going all the way back to, as Norm has said in our comments here, Puerto Rico, where the whole system started. Now that's, it's, to me though, you see, had they tried something like, let's take a game that has dice, and let's just talk about it a little bit. A game that hasn't been in the long view yet, but it's quite a popular game that has dice in it. It's called La Granja. And dice are quite a central part of that game for at least one aspect of the game. It's how you get resources. Now, they made a dice version of La Granja, and they've since then made a dice version of, like, Castles of Burgundy, which is a dice game. But, but, when I point at these games, all these dice games are like, they're played, a lot of them are played on, like, a pad of paper, and they're just intended to be much lighter experiences. And that's not what you're getting out of Roll for the Galaxy. It almost feels like, like Trois. I point at Trois when a lot of people ask me, like, why do I go for Euro games? And I'm wanting to hear TC's input on this, because TC is very much on the other side of the crevasse here. When people ask me, what is it that I dislike about the, games that I refuse to play? I don't want to name anything. I don't want to, like, alienate any listeners, but anything that has Roll for Success. So anyway, the thing that I love about Trois is that you get to roll your dice and then make your decisions, and that's present here in Roll for the Galaxy. And I would just say, in general, you're not only doing that, you're also choosing what dice you get, and it's much more like the system is a little bit more susceptible to what's at your disposal, but also much more sort of malleable, I would say, as a result. So some of the coolest dice ever being used in this game. TC, hearing about this, when we discussed this episode, TC, your main comment to me was, I love those loud dice cups.
Oh, yeah. I love shaking those cups. Good stuff.
Could you give us the old TC perspective on what we've talked about so far? What are your takeaways? And just you go, TC. What do you have to say about that? And have we turned you into a Euro gamer yet?
No, I've always had a soft spot for Euros. My biggest problem with Euros is sometimes there's no theme on them. I've liked Roll. Roll is a nice game. My biggest problem with Roll was that, and what killed it for my wife in particular, was she didn't feel like there was a whole lot of player interaction other than trying to predict what other people were doing and capitalize on your turn to have a more efficient turn than other people were having. And that just kind of frustrated her to a large extent, which I can understand.
She's a war gamer. She really is a war gamer.
But she loves Trois. I mean, we loved the heck out of that game.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of that one was the artwork. She likes that type of art. And it's just funny because a lot of people, when I talk about Twas, like, oh, the artwork's the worst part of that game. I'm like, oh my God, that artwork is so period. It's fantastic. It draws you into the game because it's specific to that setting. But I've actually played a lot more Jump Drive than I have Roller Race, simply because you can play that game to 10 and 30 minutes and play it enough that you can get your head wrapped around it and play it over and over and enjoy it. With Roll, it never took off with my wife, so it never really hit the table again after that. But I do enjoy playing it. If I can find the right people to play it with at conventions and stuff, I'm always shaking that cup. Between that and Dice Town, they're my favorite dice games. You know, slam. I love it. And the decisions you make in them are really good too. Is that ranty enough? Is that good enough?
Well, we've at least heard your voice, so it is kind of nice. Yeah, we got that in. But, check that box off. All right, we can go back and talk about what we actually care about.
Okay, cool. I got my 2 cents in. Awesome.
No, TC, that's interesting, that perspective. Like, the fact that the historical wargamer side of her, like, she appreciates Twa for its gameplay and for the historical aspect. Now, with sci-fi, you don't have history there because it's theoretically in the future. And let's use this to transition over to a discussion of theme, which TC brought up. Now, I, for one, am one to feel that these games have such an interesting, intricate, embedded theme that is something that is not, it's not going to come hit you upside the head, as in, say, a nun riding a motorcycle with a Tommy gun, but it's there, and it's one of those things where when you dig in this game, like, I find that, oh my goodness, I never thought about that, but this pirate world makes sense. It's people dealing in novelty goods, and they're dealing in, they're getting it for super cheap, and that's why they're able to turn such a huge profit on it, and that's just a single card/tile in the game that gives you these things. And I really actually do enjoy reading the tiles in Roll and seeing how they sort of translated some of the same ideas that I know from Race. And I feel like in some ways you almost see a story arc forming with certain tile sets, with your genetic tiles and your uplift tiles. This happens a lot more in Race than necessarily in Roll, but that's where the breadth, of my experience lies. Would you, Max, would you just really quickly let us know if theme is at all important to you? And if it is, what do you think about the theme in Roll for the Galaxy?
Yeah, I really do enjoy good theming on games. In Roll, the theming is slightly less important. I like the artwork, and I like how the artwork, like you were saying, tends to match the cards, or the tiles when you're looking at them. I don't necessarily see the overarching storylines in them in this game, but there are. I do enjoy theme in a lot of my games. I mean, I also dabble in war games, so those I do enjoy a good war game. But like some of the games I really like the theming of is like Alien Frontiers. I really love like the retro sci-fi art of that, and I really think it all fits together in Alien Frontiers. I don't know if you've played that, but it all comes together in a good package for that game.
Sure.
Yeah, that's another one of my wife's favorite games. She really likes Alien Frontiers. She's disturbingly good at that game.
Well, guys, I have no comment. I agree with you that the sci-fi retro theming is interesting. I would rather play Roll if I want a sci-fi one, though. I think what people kind of criticize Roll and Race for is they feel like the theme is negligible. Like it's a realistic future society, which to me is much more engaging than, these sort of like stereotypical, incredibly stereotyped, but extremely pushed to one side, like these sci-fi races. It's like, this is the warlike race. This is the race that's super, science themed. And it's like, what really, let's think about it. When races are going to be more and more developed, aren't they going to be kind of like, understanding that there's a time and a place, and to everything there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. And anybody there? The birds reference. No? Okay. Well, I just really enjoy the fact that it's realistic. I like the fact that it's not necessarily pushing towards one side more so than I just see this future in which there's like this sort of peaceful coexistence, which is almost necessary, like when you've got a game that doesn't involve slamming somebody else over the head with a UFO at the edge of a popsicle stick.
Okay. Is that a reference to Alien Frontiers or Cosmic Encounter?
Oh, maybe there's a little bit of everything slapped into there.
I mean, just on my perspective, I think with the reason that we gravitate more towards Schwa and Alien Frontiers is that there was definitely more interaction. Like in Schwa, you roll, you can actually buy those dice out from people and really screw them over, and do some mean things in Schwa. And then in Roll for the Galaxy, it's like you just roll and you're like, okay, what'd you do? Well, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to do my own thing and maximize what I can do and try to be more efficient than the other people. But yeah, that's just Carissa,
I agree.
We like to punch each other in the face, but yeah, I do like my Dominion too, and so
maybe this could be. yeah.
We're like the opposite of Rado, but it's like
really
we don't enjoy a game unless we are just at each other's throats. I was talking to Joe about Uwe Rosenberg. I'm like, yeah, I like Babel.
It's the only game he's played, though. It's okay. Okay, it's okay. I would have, just absolutely disowned TC at that point if he had said, yeah, I hate X plus Y plus Z. Oh, yeah, and Agricola. Hate that game. So it's okay. TC hasn't played a lot of those games, but it sounds like that's been more of an issue of inclusivity in his group. It's okay. And you know what, TC? There's a reason we haven't talked about it.
It's okay. It's a shame. I understand.
That's sarcasm, by the way. Sarcasm, listeners. You can't even see my voice, or you can't even see my face there on the actual YouTube. So, but that is sarcasm. I would say that for me, like interaction, I feel like I'm at the 0 on this number line when it comes to interaction. I can appreciate an interaction in both ways. Like what I want an interaction that feels fair, though. So if you're able to do something negative to me, I want it to be something that I could have seen coming, right? Like I want it to be something that I could have done something about or seen coming, or something that I can react to, something that I could sort of like, now I can try to get back, but it's not just going to ruin both our games because we sit here, at an arms race that does nothing. At the same time, I can also appreciate a game in which in which there's interaction, but that interaction almost starts from 0 and only goes positive. And that's what I would say Roll is. Roll is not a game that's devoid of player interaction, TC. It's a game in which the player interaction is going to only benefit you if you can figure it out. It's not going to impair you if you don't see something coming. It's just simply that you're not going to collect a benefit.
Man, must be getting late.
What?
Oh, I hear your point. I was just flipping you some crap there, Joe. Just sorry.
TC does not speak that language. I think that's what I got from that. So yeah.
I mean, we got a war gamer here. Yeah, Joe, if you sit with me, you're going to see something coming. Okay, something's going to be coming. Okay.
I think if I'm playing with you, I know there's something coming. I would say that, like, I don't even have to look for it.
I know.
That's why TC's sitting there just looking for the tools with which to destroy his opponents. And in race, he's like, wait a minute. Is all this stuff just good stuff for me? Come on.
This is boring. It's efficiency. We got Max here's a war gamer. He knows the fun. It's like, oh, here they come. I'm gonna roll this die. Oh, your flank's gone. Oh, wow, where did that come from?
You get some real good stories out of those.
Yes, you do. You really do. Anyway, back to Roll. I'm sorry, I'm distracting you. And it's getting, I'm getting a little punchy.
TC, you are coming at this from a totally different angle that is extremely important to the discussion about this game. And I appreciate every little bit of your misguided existence.
Well, at least I exist, right?
Now, this is, yeah, to bring it back to roll, though, what would you say, Max, because it is getting late, like TC was saying, what would you say to put a cap on this beautiful episode that has been awesome having you join us with, your sort of elevator pitch to somebody, you know, let's say that you're at Gen Con, and you're trying to get some player who's kind of on the fence, you know, like, I'm not so sure about roll, you know, what can you tell me? You know, what's your elevator pitch to them?
Oh, man. You know, I guess, you know, I tell them, you know, if you like a game, that's, you know, you got to try to make an efficient engine. This is a game you're going to like. If you want a game that you can actually learn, but then expand your experience in, you know, get better at it every time you play it. This is a game you're going to like. You know, you don't want a game that you're never going to get to play because nobody will play it with you. This is a game that you can get people to play with you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you like puzzles, every turn is a little puzzle, and I think you're just really going to enjoy this game.
Just beautiful, dude. That's precisely what it took to seal the deal for me, because, yeah, it is something that has that level of accessibility, but also the type of depth where you're crunching on every single decision that the game throws at you. So you've got me over as a convert. Sounds like TC was kind of like trying to convert over, you know, a heathen, a heretic. Thus, you would have done better with
roll for the galaxy if whoever wants to. It's a fine game.
You'd have done better with a gas can in a match here, Max.
But I can tell you a few people who won't play it in my game group. But I don't have to play with my game group. I can find new people to play it with, and I'll be perfectly happy.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting, TC, the perspective that you were able to give, though, just on a lot of these different topics that have come up, you know, kind of accentuate some of the areas of interlap and some of the areas where you know, it's best to play certain games with certain groups, and you know, players are going to enjoy and sit down at the table for diverse sort of ways of fulfillment. So I think, though, that Race for the Galaxy definitely does it for an awful lot of people. And
absolutely, yeah.
Or not Race, I'm sorry, Roll for the Galaxy. My bad.
Roll works pretty well, too.
How many times have I messed that up, man? I probably said Race, I mean Roll, at least 6 times here, man. I just started a little coin where I just clink. You know, every time the audience hears me clink into the cup, they're like, oh, Joe just said Race instead of Roll. Oops. There's another quarter. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Max. And I can tell that you did your homework. Like, not only do you know this game inside and out, you did a little bit of homework in reading the rule book to kind of prepare for this. And I think that you found, you know, a few little nuggets that you hadn't even seen before. So I really appreciate the perspective and sort of the, you know, the heightened place that you can just talk from here. You were able to analyze every little bit of this, dude. I think you've done an excellent job on the long view.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Get one of those war games on, and I'll chew your ear off.
You'll hear a lot more from TC in those. This is definitely more up my wheelhouse, but that's why we do this thing together. TC and I. We have our own sort of spheres, and anyway, it'll be real interesting because one day TC and I are going to play together. And I hope the Longview podcast survives that day.
It will survive. It'll be a big crater. It'll be awesome. We'll just be like just ashes and laughing is all happen.
That would be TC getting the last laugh. If it's just a whole bunch of smiles and me sitting on the top of the podium with TC down there at 3rd, 4th, or 5th, then it would have been my victory. That's how you know. TC would just have slightly less victory points than me.
Yeah, what would happen, it'd be like how most games of Twilight Imperium go, where me and a guy I know, we just go at it the whole game and we basically take ourselves out and have a good time while someone else wins the game.
Yeah, that would probably be what happens, because in those attacking games, it's all about whoever gets attacked the least. And with me and TC,
that would not be happening.
We would both ensure mutual destruction.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thanks once again to you, Max. This has just been an awesome time to unpack and really to get me to rekindle this interest in this game system that I had cooled on. And that's going to be something that I take away from here. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks again. Take care, guys.
Yeah, and you too, TC. Keep your stick on the ice there. We got 3 more recordings coming at you this week from the Longview and the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. So check us out here. Check out the Longview Guild and the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly Guild on Board Game Geek to really get the up-to-date post as soon as those episodes are released. And we just, this is the first of many things. So the start of a great week, an epic week where board game media will never be the same. It's getting pretty late here, guys.
Hey, Max, before we go, have you played Jump Drive?
No, I have not.
Okay, I kind of dig on that one. I'd be curious your take on it.
All right, it's one I'll have to add to the list.
And it's cheap. It's like under $20. Yeah.
Well, hey, then maybe you'll get off the list pretty quick.
Yeah. Because that's my biggest problem. Just talking roll. I'm like, yeah, I remember. Oh no, I'm thinking of Jump Drive, not Race. Oh crap, I'm getting them confused now.
I just saw that advertisement BTG. Like they're looking to push it again. Like that's really interesting to me. I still haven't played it myself either, so I'm in Max's camp here.
Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about it. I've been enjoying it mainly because I can play it in like less than 30 minutes and play it like 4 times. So I lose. Let's try again. No, we're playing again. I lose again. No, we're playing this again. No. Reshuffle that. We're playing this again.
Yeah. It seems like it's a very condensed version. So I wonder how much it's just like Race. But yeah, I don't have much to say about it. I think that it was mentioned in the chat though that it's I think Norm was saying earlier that he enjoyed Jump Drive and that was his experience. I almost said Race there. What the heck is wrong with me?
You got Race roll jump.
Consonant. Yeah, race roll drive. Race jive jump. Yeah, this
roll for the jump drive.
roll for the jump drive.
Okay. Let's call it, guys. I'm tired.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to this. Thanks for joining us in the comments here, Norm and Mur, dude. It's going to be a great week, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you again, Mur. Hopefully you can make it, and your comments have really helped. Mur is an expert at this game as well. It's great to have so many folks a part of this community that love these games and have such a amazingly robust knowledge of how they work. So thank you, Longview Podcast community. Thanks for listening to this. We will catch you on the next episode of The Longview.